A blessed day and thanks for joining us again. My name is Shawn, and I have with me today Mark, and welcome to End Time Restoration, set
day,
for a
everyone.
new beginning.
Yes.
And Mark, we had a very interesting topic last week. We spoke about Enoch,
We really did.
and we spoke a lot about vanity
Mhm.
and the templates. And we want to continue in that same vein today because there's so much that we realize that Enoch spoke to us about
Yeah.
that we want to really have all those who viewing today
Mhm.
really get into what it is that we have to understand about Enoch.
Correct. And, as we said, we are sharing from the Book of Enoch, the end time template. And last time we were here, we established that there are templates in the earth. And most importantly, God has a special template that requires exactness, that everyone who wants to be successful, just like how Enoch was, follows this. But there are many other templates in the earth, and we said they all fall under the umbrella of vanity. And that is what we want to take a deeper look at today. Because if I were to ask you, do you recognize vanity in all its forms? A person may say, yes. Anything that promotes pride or being puffed up, that is vanity. But you may see, as we get more into the sharing today, that what people don't call vanity may really be, and I can tell you, it actually will be vanity.
That's why we mentioned the point that the subtlety of this whole topic,
Yeah.
because it's important for everyone to identify what vanity is.
Yeah.
And it's important for them to identify the patterns. And you said something there, the divine pattern. And what we realize is that devils seek to replicate, they seek to cause confusion, and they have their agenda. And one of the things that we went through last week, I want us to kind of go into today before we go more into vanity.
Yep.
It's really about Babel.
Mhm.
And that name in itself signifies confusion.
Correct.
And the Lord is not an author of confusion.
Yeah.
He has done so much things for us to have one discernment, understanding, and clarity. But there are so many warnings within the Bible. And some of the apostles and the New Testament saints, they quoted from Enoch deliberately because they wanted us to be aware of vanity.
Yes.
And to be aware of the warnings that the Lord has put for us to be aware of.
Yes. And truly, it is the same point we see. Let us make a name for ourselves. And the reality is, this particular encouragement would have come from Satan. This would have been what was handed down to man because it was the point of the very first rebellion, which was his own rebellion. He wanted to have a name for himself. He wanted to be exalted. And he would have encouraged others to do so and was successful. And this same successful pattern or way of manipulating people to go after a name for themselves, he now causes man to fall in that same deception as well.
We also know that the Lord does not interfere, but He divinely intervenes.
Correct.
To cause certain things to happen.
Yeah.
And that is what we saw with what happened at Babel.
Mm-hmm.
But if we understand also the spirits that were behind this whole activity in Babel, that they wanted to ascend.
Yeah.
But the point is, the spirits did not die. They were scattered. And that scattering now, we have several things that, we as men on the earth had to experience because of that.
Correct. Because, as you're rightly saying, the pattern of rebellion or vanity didn't go away when the Lord scattered the men at Babel. What actually happened is that they reproduced the same rebellion in their smaller sections to cause this whole point of how we make a name for ourselves to again be seen, but in many different activities. Now, when we consider that the way vanity works, it doesn't start off loud. Vanity actually starts off like a small voice, almost like a whisper, encouraging you to now pursue a particular action. And the reason why I'm saying that is that we could see this point from the very first person who fell into this deception, which is Eve. Her initial point of being prompted or pushed would have started off as a particular voice, very small, still voice speaking to her. And then eventually we're saying vanity gets to a place where it's almost like a shout, where all it seeks to do is to direct your every action into being vain.
Yeah, and you mentioned even we spoke last week about or last episode about the divine cult here.
Yep.
And because that template is trying to be replicated,
Yep.
what happened with Babel is that the culture that they tried to inculcate in man was all about vanity.
Correct.
And that spread, and what we saw birthed from that is this whole point about idols.
Yeah.
And an idol in itself is something that tries to replicate or take the place of God.
Yes.
Or that divine person that is our creator.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is that most people cannot even identify this whole point about idols.
Correct.
And what it really represents in the earth today. So there's a culture that has been established in the earth where people now try to ascend, where people put things and replicate things that idols in their lives.
Yep.
And it's not just about an object,
Yep.
but it's all about vanity.
And the way it works its way, sorry to say, as almost like part of your natural life. It's like fabric that you wear. It seeks to make itself the norm for you to put on. And we have to see how it grows, because consider, we went from Eve, we went to Babel, which is a bigger group, and then from that bigger group, which we said there were sections, we moved into empires. And I know that may sound very strange to persons, but that's exactly what replication does. It starts off at one point very small and continues to build momentum until eventually we have now what is termed empires. And we can have now idolatry in an empire being so ingrained and rooted that it's not even seen as idolatry or vanity, but seen as just the way this empire is crafted or structured.
Mm-hmm.
But it really is vanity operating.
Yeah, and we mentioned that we are sharing from the Book of Enoch, and this book is available on Amazon.
Yep.
And because of time, we can't go into every single thing because there are so many things that we want to focus on.
Yeah.
That we are really encouraging persons to get a copy of the book and read in depth. Because why I'm saying this, because what you just mentioned there, the empires.
Empires, yeah.
The book mentions 5 great empires, and I want to call them out.
Okay.
It mentioned Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
Babylon,
Yeah.
Assyria,
Mm-hmm.
Greece, and Rome.
Yeah.
Most people will identify with these empires.
Yeah.
But what we saw with each one of these empires is that they try to replicate the same divine template that existed. And to give context to that statement, I just want to mention something in Egypt.
Okay.
And this is in Exodus 7, verse 10 to 12. So I'm just going to do a little reading, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it says, "And Moses and Aaron went unto Pharaoh, and they did so as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent." Now, most people would have seen this in movies, right? "Then Pharaoh also called the wise men and sorcerers. Now the magicians of Egypt, they also did in the like manner with their enchantments. For they cast down every man his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods." So, I wanted to read that in its entirety because it didn't seem something strange that they could have called upon their enchantments to replicate what it is Aaron and Moses was doing. And that seemed like a norm in Egypt. And that is something that concerned me when I read this, because enchantments, a rod turned into a serpent, it didn't seem like a surprise to anyone.
Correct, yeah. And that just shows what that empire had as its forefront. That is a form of vanity. And as you rightly said, these are the points that are covered in the book, because it gave all the different empires, but it also gives the expansion, the explanation of what was prevailing. So, as you said, Egypt, and I like the point that you referenced that most of us in our era would have seen some bit about the account of Moses through some movie or the other. And you do see it. And that is why it's emphasized that Egypt was really bondage and sorcery. We have Babylon in terms of pride and occult commerce. Assyria, as you mentioned, it's where we had conquest. And Greece, we know, is human intellect. A lot of things are done when it comes to the Greeks, in particular, in terms of art, etc. But all of this was based upon a vain drive in itself. And finally, what we should be very familiar with as well is Rome. Rome is the template where imperial control was disguised as peace. And that is really how the book puts it perfectly. Because when we consider what was taking place, it was world domination as a trust, but it was under the context of we are bringing peace to all the nations that we conquer, to move them from one state into what is now called the best way you can live, which is under Roman law.
And, and that is a serious point you just made. Because in each one of these areas, when we look at Egypt, these empires, they sought to replicate specific things.
Yep.
And that was what was mentioned also in the book, that the fallen spirits or angels who were once in heaven, who had different things going for them,
Yeah.
they used their powers, I would say, to influence men in specific areas.
Yeah.
And even as you mentioned Rome, what was mentioned also in Babylon, in Egypt, when they had that encounter, we saw two priesthoods. We saw what was divine and what was not divine. But what I liked about this whole encounter is that Moses' rod swallowed up what was the inaccurate position. And that in itself is a prophetic signal for us to understand in the end what is divine will consume every aspect of vanity.
Correct. Always.
But what I liked about what you mentioned with Rome also is that it was at this time that Jesus himself came in to the fora. It was at this time that Jesus actually was born. So we saw something happening now in Rome, and the person who was divine in himself was born.
Yes, and it's not a small point to me, because as the book tells us clearly, Rome was the perfected template. If we want to see the culmination of where vanity operates at its peak, and we can relate to this because all of the facets of the Roman Empire still remain active in the earth today. And Rome did things in a particular way where they organized themselves, where commerce was the main thing that drove their whole operation. And they actually made commerce almost like a god. Common G-O-D. And to have Jesus Christ being inserted when this empire was at its peak is not a small point, when we realize that God's true point for all of us is that he will always break and dismantle that which is not his.
It's ironic that you mentioned break, because I just want to read Daniel 2 and verse 44. And it said, "In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to the other people, but it shall break," as you mentioned here, "in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." So we saw what happened with Moses, consume, but we're seeing here now that what Daniel prophesied about thousands of years ago, that the kingdom that Jesus was coming with was going to destroy every kingdom that has vanity at the forefront. And that is awesome in itself, because we are now being placed in a position that we can actually be part of this kingdom that will destroy vanity.
Correct. And I'm sharing from the excerpt in the book because we have to realize, as we said before, God's point is that every empire will be subject to his judgment and renewal. And what is shared is that there's a pattern of judgment and renewal. Each empire follows the same cycle. Firstly, exaltation through human brilliance. Then, corruption through spiritual vanity. Then, oppression of the righteous. And finally, exposure and fall under divine decree. Every empire follows this same pattern, where the Lord will cause it, as you said. God does divine intervention. So things would look like it's flourishing for a while, and then he will intervene and bring across the exposure and the fall under divine decree so that renewals can take place, which is what Daniel would have spoke about with the kingdom of Jesus Christ being ushered in. So this is not a small thing. And when we look at what is taking place in the earth today, we can see these same points. We could see about human brilliance being exalted. We could see corruption through spiritual vanity, where persons are always about making a name or something for themselves that have them visible or being seen. We also see that for those persons to have a name or be visible or be identified with something great, it is at the cost of somebody else where there is oppression. All of these things are evident, and they always show themselves as something that the Lord will respond to.
That is important for all of us to hear, because I'm just listening to what you're saying, Mark. And one of the things that was also mentioned in the book is that vanity of itself is self-defeating.
Yes.
And that's a big statement, because once it's not of God and it's not built by the divine template, it will crumble, it will fall. So you mentioned a lot of things there about technology, about different things that these kingdoms had working in them. But the point is, each and every one of these kingdoms fell.
Yes.
And that is something that is important for all of us to hear today, because you may feel and see things and say, well, this looks good,
Yeah.
or this is a good pattern to follow.
Yeah.
But what we saw with Enoch is that every single thing or position of vanity eventually crumbled.
Yeah. And I have to read this statement just as it is in the book where you mention the line, vanity is self-defeating, for our viewers and listeners. Because it says, and in every fall, God demonstrated a prophetic truth. Vanity is self-defeating. What begins in pride will end in ruin. Only righteousness exalts a nation. And that becomes the focal point. I'll repeat again. Only righteousness exalts a nation. And many times we forget that. So when we see people on the earth seeking to have a place where they are lifted up and not seeking to do it through the only principle that God has said will work, which is righteousness, it is only bound to one thing, which is failure.
We saw that as a pattern. And what was mentioned with Daniel is that this stone is really the church.
Yeah.
And it really represents Christ's kingdom. And we know that we are in the end times.
Yeah.
And we know that this is the season or time that everyone is looking forward to the coming of Christ.
Correct.
So, the question really is that because of all these warnings that is placed in scripture, how could we really position ourselves to really fight against vanity? What could we do with this knowledge that we are speaking about?
Yeah. And that's why for the church in particular, we are required to walk in this era with the spirit of revelation. We need discernment to accurately identify what is vanity and what isn't. But even more so, we must as a church also take a stand where we are not only the ones not falling into the trap, but also seeking to get others delivered or breaking others free. So we have to say, this is vanity, but more than just saying this is it, seek to cause others to be broken from it through exposure by we shedding the light on these things to say, this is what vanity is really about. So everything the church has to do is very deliberate, but by the spirit of revelation.
Yeah. So we are the first, what people refer to as the first church functioning, the Acts Church.
Yeah.
But they were persecuted. We know that they went through a whole lot of persecution in their time. So someone might be listening to this and saying, I can identify what is being said.
Yeah.
But if I'm to speak out or to say something about it,
yeah,
I myself might be in a position where I face persecution.
Yeah.
But what I found well interesting in what was mentioned in the Book of Enoch here is that the persecution that the church went through is what made it stronger.
Yeah.
And one of the things that happened in Rome is that violence was a norm. So we could probably say that in our time that violence is a norm.
Yeah.
And we saw what happened when Christ was crucified.
Yeah.
So besides the fact of the public the public displays of violence,
yeah,
we also saw that truth was something that was not apparent. It was trodden down in the streets.
Yeah.
So Jeremiah spoke about this. He said, this is Jeremiah 20 and verse 8. For since I spoke, I cried out. I cried violence and spoil, because the word of the Lord was made a reproach unto me, and a derision daily.
Yeah.
So that was being experienced in his time. And it is what we could say is happening also in our time.
Correct.
Where truth is something that is trampled upon.
Yep.
And where violence comes like a norm.
Yeah. It is normalized, unfortunately. And all of that is the working of vanity itself, so that you live at a standard that is not God's standard. And we'll start at the place where you really give the emphasis first, which is the church. Because there's an interesting excerpt written here as an encouragement to the church. It says, to discern the end time template, the church must learn to inhabit cities without worshiping in them, to build sanctuaries and altars, not monuments, to pioneer technologies of mercy rather than machines of destruction. What does that really mean? It means that we understand that we are living in the world, but not to be a part of the world where we are caught up with the world system, but to utilize all of God's grace and mercy, just as you said, as the Acts Church would have done, to cause deliverance to come to persons who ought to be saved, as said. So in everything, it's about how we live out the success story because of the inputs the Lord will give onto the church, especially who has to stand against all vanity by his template.
I realize that you're saying, without really saying it, is that we as saints have to identify the patterns of vanity and know exactly how to break it.
Correct.
And that is how I realized that church, the early church, started off doing things where they spoke out for truth, where they weren't afraid to confront things. But for us who are supposed, as the Bible says, who have double of the grace that they had, we are supposed to have so much going for us that this whole point of being caught up in the world and the worldly systems,
Correct.
we are so empowered with the knowledge and the information now that we are in a better position to fight against these things.
Yes, yes. And again, within the viewers and listeners' appetite, I want to share how that is encouraged in the book as well. Because it says, when we receive the kingdom with gratitude and reverent awe, we do not panic. We prepare. We do not curse. We contend. We do not bargain. We bear witness. The lion and the lamb does not teach his church to succeed by using the beast's tactics. Instead, he anoints us to endure, love, speak, heal, and to shine until the heavenly city is seen with our own eyes. And I know there's no greater encouragement any person could hear who is really listening to us today and saying, I want to make sure that I am living out God's template against vanity.
And what you spoke about there, I would say in a nutshell, is for us to remain unspotted from the world.
Yep.
And I guess that's why the Bible is so particular in mentioning to us that every one of us must remain without spot and without blemish. Because everything that is in the world is things that can cause you to live out a lifestyle of vanity. And there were three things that I know one of the apostles mentioned to us. And he spoke about the point about worldliness. And it's really about the world system, the systems of this world, which are designed to make you stumble and fall, and not to live out your purposes in Christ.
Correct.
And he spoke about three things really, three main things. The lust of the flesh, which is really our appetite for things that we are not supposed to have. We have things like fornication, adultery, and those things.
Yep.
But he also spoke about the lust of the eyes. I know you mentioned the age where there's so much things that can attract you to want and to desire because it looks nice.
Yeah.
But these things will also pass away. And he spoke about ambition, the pride of life. And this is kind of encapsulated in what, devils or what Satan presented, even from the book of Genesis to Eve.
Yeah.
He made her look, he made her desire, and even after a while, she and all started to repeat, this is something good.
Yeah.
And that is the trap that many people seem to fall in. And it worked then. And I think now
it works just as well.
It is being presented in various forms.
Yes.
But the end result it is the same thing.
Yes.
A trap that is built on vanity to cause our appetites, our desires, our ambitions to come to the forefront, and we live out vanity.
Correct. And we have to see worldliness as a seduction, because that's what it seeks to do, to seduce you to get into a particular behavior that is normalized. This particular point of, that we could say, seduction or worldliness would have been really at its peak through one empire, which was the Babylonian Empire. And it has continued in every empire, every nation thereafter. Because what are the features of this point, right? And I'll share, because the book highlights, it says, 1, luxury remains insulated from neighborly love. People can relate to that. The more someone has in their household, a nice couch, a nice stove, a nice fridge, see how much they want people coming into their house or into their space. Because the better it looks or the more luxurious it is, you go into a point where you start to push others away. And again, when we started off today, we said, you may see things that you live out, and you may not call it vanity, but it actually is vanity. So this is one of the points that's highlighted. Luxury remains insulated from neighborly love. The second point is metrics that prioritize capturing attention over promoting human well-being. Well, all of us can relate to that now in the society where we are. I am sure many people realize that what do we see on social media? Fights, crashes, different accidents. Nobody goes in to assist, but everyone is content to commentate, to record, and then put themselves somewhere in the story saying that I am sharing this with you, or I am giving this point to you. So we are seeing that in this particular point of lifestyle that people think is acceptable is really also vanity. And it goes on further. It says, liturgies of endless choice that foster the inability to choose that which is good. And in the world today, we see that as something that is pushed. You have many choices. Keep choosing. Don't believe you just have to conform to one thing alone, but choose all of this. The world likes to flood you with options till you basically don't have a moral compass again as to what to choose to do. And the last thing that was operating as a seduction in Babylon at its height was laws that favor protecting instruments rather than the individuals that they serve. Keeping principles or particular structures in the economy was more important than people's well-being. People can relate to this from the point of saying the rich does things to stay rich and for the poor to stay poor deliberately. Because again, it's about maintaining a particular structure which is based upon vanity. And that's what I'm saying today we have to consider, do we really see vanity in all of its forms?
Yeah. And that is, in a nutshell, the crisis of our era, where, man sees himself as charting his own destiny. You don't have to have that input from the divine. You can do things in such a way to promote your own goals, to promote yourself, to ascend, to do different things, to enrich yourself. But you see, you mentioned something about the structures. It is a whole structure that has been designed, I would say, for people to rebel,
Yep.
to fail. And I know we mentioned it in a previous podcast, the Tabernacle of David being rebuilt.
Yeah.
And that was all about rebuilding godly structures.
Mhm.
It was about having a position where there's now divine access. Because we know that the whole point about Adam walking in the garden, we spoke about the fact that Enoch walked with God. And we also mentioned the fact that we as end time saints must have that relationship and that access where we can walk with God and have that intimate access at all times. So we will always have a position that things of vanity do not have access to us.
Correct. Because we have to fight against the manipulation. And this is a point that we have to understand that was prevalent even, as we can say, better to understand it, from Eve, where the serpent would have manipulated her desire. It all starts there. And the reason why I'm drawing us back to that is because this is where disobedience is rebranded and says this disobedience will make you wise. And it still continues today. And I like how you brought in the point about David's tabernacle because he provided an antidote, particularly to say, for whatever the earth may encourage you to set up through its deceptive wisdom as a structure, here is what the real structure ought to look like. And here is how persons get their benefit. Because, as you rightly said, it was mentioned before, but under David's kingdom structure, everyone benefited differently. And everyone saw that was in the earth at that point in time how greatly not only Israel as a nation, but how every member of that nation would have thrived under David's rule. No one had a lack. It was seen in the many festivals and different things that they did. But this becomes the point, as we're saying, even with Enoch as the pattern, where we started this whole thing around. That Enoch becomes the person we center around, who has a success account, who, as you said, would have had this relationship and walk with God. And what did he do especially? Let's look at something that was shared in Jude. In verse 14 it says, "And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly, among them of all their ungodly deeds, which have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches, which ungodly sinners have spoken against him." So it is a prophecy. But even more so, we can understand his participation and willingness and agreement. Because when we see this point about the Lord coming with 10,000 of his saints, if you ask anyone, would Enoch be part of this? We know what their response would be. And then you have to ask yourself the question, am I a person who is living such a lifestyle that I am considered one of these 10,000s of saints?
I think that's important for all of us to hear, even as we close off today, because the invitation is really that you, everyone here in today, can be a part of this. When the Lord will be coming back, you can be a part of this army to destroy, to crush this whole aspect of vanity that seems to be thriving in the earth today.
Yeah.
The fact is that there's no middle line. You can be part of this army or you can be part of the vanity that is going to be destroyed.
Sure.
And this is the invitation for everyone today, because you mentioned Enoch and you mentioned Adam, and there's one thing that is also common with those saints in the book of Acts. They had a zeal for things of the Lord.
Yeah.
They had a zeal for the divine.
Definitely.
And they didn't have a desire for worldly things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good point for us to end up today's podcast, because there are so many things that we are going to go into as we explore this whole series on the Book of Enoch. So I just want to say thanks again for all those who have joined us today. You can also post your comments, and we are also encouraging you to get a copy of this Book of Enoch that is available on Amazon, and enjoy reading along with us.